Now we're going to have a look at some of the different arbitrary scripts that were invented and that were used by blind people in the 19th century. And on the table we've got 4 items that relate to this story. The first book that I want to talk about is this gospel. It's another gospel embossed in Lucas type. And just to give you a quick description, it's opened on its frontispiece. On the left-hand side, we have some visible ink print text, which reads "The Gospel According to St. John, edited by T.M. Lucas." And on the right-hand side, we then have corresponding embossed print. And the book is about 20 centimetres wide, about 30 centimetres high, and it's about 3 centimetres deep. So Thomas Lucas was a shorthand teacher originally, and he became, like many other people, interested in this issue of blind people's literacy in the 1830s, and he thought he could do something to help. So he developed a system that was based on shorthand or stenographic principles, and he invented his system in the 1830s. So this system basically uses contracted forms, so it combines letters, it has symbols for commonly used words, and therefore it reduced the length of sentences and word scripts. So he felt that this was going to be beneficial to blind readers. And it uses 12 different symbols which are positioned in different ways. Lucas was involved with the Bristol Society for the Blind. They supported his system, and it had quite a lot of success in the middle decades of the 19th century. I like this book because what's interesting about this book is that we also have an inscription at the top, handwritten in ink. So above the Gospel According to St. John, we have the inscription Harriet Curry. And there's a poem at the back of the book which also kind of details the occasion in which this Bible was gifted to Harriet Curry. So here we actually have an example of a Bible that belonged to a particular reader as well. So this is an interesting book in that respect. Just walking around to this side of the table now. Another early popular arbitrary script was one invented by James Frere, who was associated with charitable institutions in London and Liverpool. And again in the 1830s, James Frere, who was sighted, felt that he had good ideas to help develop an embossed script. So his idea was to basically create an alphabet that was based on the sounds of letters. So he created a symbol for every sound that he identified in the English language. And then he also created a special memory technique to help people to remember those different symbols. So what we have on display here, we actually have a pamphlet that he produced explaining and outlining his system. And it goes through all the different sounds in the alphabet that he identifies, as well as the symbols in his alphabet as well. And we have, it's open here on pages 2 to 3. And I'm just going to read out, just to give you a sense of maybe how easy or how difficult it was for people to actually memorise his technique. So the symbol for L, which is a semicircle with its curved side touching the bottom. His memory technique for this is a half circle looking upwards is L. L lies level and looks like a lake. So these were the types of tools that he encouraged people to use to try and remember the different symbols. But again, Frere, because there were contractions allowed in this system, Frere felt that it would be easier for blind people to use, and the symbols would be easier as well for the finger to read rather than the Roman letter. And what we have on display above this is actually an example of a book that's printed in Frere type. So this is, again, it's a common theme that's emerging, The Gospel According to St. John, which is published in Frere type. And this is quite a sizable book. It's about 20 centimetres high and about 35 centimetres wide and about 3 centimetres deep. And it's on the first page we have it includes a grammar and a code to the system, and this was quite a typical feature of early embossed books. They would come printed with a code to help people interpret the alphabet. So it has a short grammar for the use of the blind scholar by James J.H. Frere, and then we turn the page and we're into the text itself. One of the other contributions that Frere made was that he also flipped the sentence structure, so the sentence tracking rather. So we have at the end of every line, we actually have little curves which are intended to guide the reader to basically reverse their finger and read the next sentence backwards, so to help people keep their place as they're reading the embossed text. So this was one of the features that he contributed and invented as well. Finally, I'm just going to come around to the other side of the table. And I want to draw your attention to an alphabet that never really gained very much popularity at the time, but it's nonetheless very interesting and I think raises lots of interesting questions for us today when we're thinking about issues around control and access over reading formats. And this is a book called The New Ponte Ocular Stenographic System for Embossing, by which the blind of all nations will be able to emboss for themselves. And it's by a man called George Hughes. It's from the 1840s. Now, Hughes was actually himself blind, and he felt that, again, the attempts that he'd made to read texts that were embossed in the Roman letter, he found it very difficult. So he decided to try and invent a system that would be more easier for him to read by the finger. And I'm just going to turn this book around because what we have here printed on the frontispiece is actually the code to his alphabet. And what's interesting about this is that in some ways it resembles Braille because it uses dotted symbols arranged in a cell. So Hughes invented a system that was incorporated contractions, was symbolic, and he felt this would be easier to read by the finger. What Hughes also talks about in this book and in other places is he expresses the sense that perhaps sighted people who were predominantly at this point in control of embossed literature as educators or educators in asylums or inventors attached to charitable institutions, he felt that actually maybe sighted people were reluctant to give up embossed literature to a symbolic system because they would be worried about not being able to read it themselves. And he described this in terms of the selfish feeling of wanting to have a power of writing unto themselves. So he talks about it in terms of power as well, which is very interesting, and suggested that actually blind people might be the best place to actually decide on the correct format for embossed literature, or the most effective format for embossed literature. So although it wasn't very popular, it's actually very interesting, a very interesting example. And this copy is in the RNIB archive as well. So towards the latter part of the 19th century, there were several different embossed scripts in circulation in Britain, being used in schools and in home teaching societies up and down the country.